finding self-worth in what you do. It's one of the biggest things, and also being okay with who you are, being okay with what you're doing, being okay with where you're at. And if you fail, if you don't, if you succeed, celebrating the success is a big deal, because if you don't celebrate the success, then you're just going to beat yourself up over the failures. Hey there, welcome back to the Back Pocket Creative. I appreciate if you're watching, listening, whatever you're doing to support me, I appreciate it. And this week, one thing that I've been kind of going through and toying with too, and the idea of is, when I've been doing all these projects and stuff like that, and honestly, the load that I've been carrying is pretty heavy. I've been doing a lot of different work for a lot of different people. Honestly, I'm fine. I'm doing great, but I think I know that eventually at some point, my creative limitations will start to kind of show up. And one thing that I've had to have to choose, and I continue to choose, is to keep pressing and pressing and pressing, but also allowing myself, the opportunity to fail, and allowing myself the opportunity to neither get rest, and allowing myself the opportunity to hit a wall. And I think, and not be disappointed with that, because I think sometimes, as creatives, we do a whole lot, and then the emphasis we put on ourselves is our fail points, or where we run up against a wall, or we hit a wall, or we hit a crossroads where it's very difficult, and maybe we have to stop doing things for a little while, or we have to pull away from something. And I think a lot of times we'll put a lot of blame on ourselves, like, oh, I couldn't do this, or I'm not capable of this. And I think we'll kind of like push ourselves down. And I think that's something that I'm being self-aware of here recently, is to make sure that I'm appreciating what I'm able to do, and appreciating what, even my body's able to handle when it comes to traveling, when it comes to just working and doing everything that I'm doing. It's something that my schedule has really changed, in the sense that, I don't really go to bed till probably 2-3 a.m. now. I get up, anytime between 7 and 9 o'clock. Like, it's one of those things where, like, it's gotten to a point where I am pushing myself, and I know that there's a certain point where I'm not going to be able to push myself anymore. And I'm having to mentally prepare myself for that point in time, when, hey, this stuff isn't going to work, but hey, I'm not going to push myself down and be like, oh, I can't do it, or belittle myself. Because I think the biggest thing with creative, and I've talked about it before, but self-worth, it's one of the biggest things, is finding self-worth in what you do. And also being okay with who you are, being okay with what you're doing, being okay with, where you're at. And if you fail, if you don't, if you succeed, celebrating the success is a big deal, because if you don't celebrate the success, then you're just going to beat yourself up over the failures, And so I think one of the biggest things that I've really encountered here recently is being happy with my ability, being happy with what I'm doing, but then also knowing, like, hey, there's a point in a time where I'm going to have to take a step back to rest, and being okay with that. And I'm not there. I probably got a little bit longer in me. I know I got a lot longer in me, because I've been on this path before. But the good thing too, and this is the other side of it. So I know burnout as a creative is a big word that people use. And I think I've kind of been there to an extent, although I can't really pinpoint a time where I was actually like fully burnt out. But I know I was in places in my life where I could tell, like, I was there, but I wasn't necessarily being affected in a major way. So I wasn't in full burnout, but I was there. One thing that I'm realizing is my position now, in the sense of my like actual, I guess, mental position, physical position, and what I'm doing now, my capacity is so much larger, because I moved away from what I was doing that was holding my capacity back. And so that's one thing I think I talked about it on a CA podcast, but like, sometimes you need to just step out. And I know I've talked about it in the back pocket before, but like, you just need to step out, and sometimes you need to leave that job, you need to leave that position, whatever. And that'll improve your creative capacity. That'll improve what you're able to do, And so I think a lot of times we're comfortable where we're at, and that's okay. And there's no problem with that. But I think a lot of times, where we're able to push ourselves is actually dependent on our actual location of what we're doing, and our occupation, or the things that we're doing. And a lot of times with that, when we change those things, our capacity changes. And sometimes it changes for the worse, and we have less capacity, and sometimes it changes for the better. And I think we have to just navigate that and understand, like, hey, there's times where, like, I'll think back to like, oh, this is my limit, right? Like I remember 5 years ago, I was doing as much work as I'm doing now, and like, oh, I hit a wall, right? And then I add more and I add more, and I'm like, oh, now I'm able to add so much more than I was back then. It was because I changed where I was and I changed what I was doing. So that's one thing, like, if you're frustrated with what you're able to do mentally as a creative, physically as a creative, sometimes the scenery change is worth it because then it can improve your capacity, it can improve your creativity, So that's kind of all for today. Short episode, but it's one of those things where last week ran longer. So I felt like I want to compensate with a shorter episode. So, all right, see you next week.